The autumn rain hammered against the grimy windows of the abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Sarajevo, each droplet carrying with it the weight of a city still bleeding from the wounds of war. Inside, the air was thick with cigarette smoke and the kind of tension that comes when desperate men make desperate choices. It was October 1995, and the Bosnian conflict had already claimed over 100,000 lives, leaving behind a landscape of shattered dreams and broken families. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. In this warehouse, 5 men sat around a makeshift table constructed from wooden crates and scavenged metal. They weren't soldiers anymore, not officially. The Dayton Accords were being negotiated, and the world was pretending that peace was just a signature away. But these men knew better. They were what remained of a Serbian paramilitary unit that had operated in the shadows throughout the conflict, carrying out missions that would never appear in any official military record. Their leader, Miloš Dragović, was a man whose soul had been carved hollow by 3 years of witnessing humanity at its worst. At 34, his dark hair was already streaked with premature gray, and his eyes held the 1,000-yard stare of someone who had seen too much death. The scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw was a souvenir from a mortar blast in Srebrenica, but the wounds that ran deepest were the ones no surgeon could repair. "The colonel's daughter," Dragović said, his voice barely above a whisper as he studied the photograph in his hands. The image showed a young woman, perhaps 22 or 23 years old, with piercing green eyes and auburn hair that caught the sunlight. She was beautiful in the way that made men stupid, but there was something else in her expression, an intelligence, a defiance, that suggested she was far more than just another pretty face. Colonel Viktor Petrov had been their primary target for months. The man was a ghost, a former Yugoslav People's Army officer who had somehow managed to stay one step ahead of every attempt to capture or eliminate him. Intelligence reports suggested he was coordinating arms shipments to Bosnian government forces, using a network of contacts that stretched from Belgrade to Zagreb. But Petrov himself remained frustratingly elusive, appearing and disappearing like smoke. His daughter, Elena Petrov, was different. She had been spotted 3 times in the past month, always in the same cafe in the old quarter of Sarajevo. She worked as a translator for the United Nations peacekeeping forces, a job that gave her access to information and, more importantly, made her valuable as leverage. The plan was simple in its brutality. Take the daughter, use her to draw out the father. Zoran Milic, the youngest member of their group at just 19, shifted nervously in his seat. He had joined the unit 6 months earlier after watching Bosnian forces overrun his village and execute his older brother in the town square. The boy still flinched at sudden noises, and his hands shook whenever he tried to light a cigarette. War had a way of accelerating boyhood into something that resembled manhood, but felt hollow inside. "She's just a girl," Zoran said, his voice cracking slightly. "Maybe we could—" "She's the colonel's daughter," interrupted Nikola Stoyanovich, a massive man whose arms were covered in tattoos, telling the story of his military service. Each mark represented a different operation, a different victory, a different tragedy. The third man, Alexander Jovic, said nothing. He was the group's sniper, a man who preferred to let his rifle do his talking. His silence was more unsettling than any threat, because everyone knew that when Alexander finally spoke, it usually meant someone was about to die. The fourth member of their group was perhaps the most dangerous of all. Dr. Stefan Radic had once been a respected physician in Belgrade, but the war had twisted his Hippocratic oath into something unrecognizable. He now served as their interrogator, using his medical knowledge to extract information in ways that left no permanent physical damage, but could shatter a person's mind completely. "The operation is tomorrow night," Dragović said, spreading a hand-drawn map across the table. "She leaves the UN compound at 1800 hours every Tuesday, takes the same route through the old quarter, stops at the same cafe, orders the same coffee. Creatures of habit make easy targets." The plan was meticulously crafted. They would intercept Elena as she walked through the narrow streets of old Sarajevo, using a staged accident to force her into an alley where a van would be waiting. The kidnapping itself would take less than 30 seconds, long enough for witnesses to register that something had happened, but too fast for anyone to intervene or get a clear description of the perpetrators. What none of them could have anticipated was that Elena Petrov carried with her a secret that would change everything. Hidden beneath her modest clothing, just below her left shoulder blade, was a tattoo that would make these hardened warriors question everything they thought they knew about war, loyalty, and the price of survival. The rain continued to fall outside the warehouse, washing the streets of Sarajevo, but unable to cleanse the city of its ghosts. Tomorrow would bring violence, but tonight, 5 men sat in the darkness, unaware that they were about to encounter something that would challenge every assumption they had made about their enemy and about themselves. Elena Petrov stood before the cracked mirror in her small apartment, methodically applying concealer to the bruise that had formed along her jawline 3 days earlier. The purple and yellow discoloration was a reminder of her last training session with Commander Rakic, though she doubted the Serbian paramilitaries hunting her father would see it that way. To them, she was just the colonel's daughter, a soft target, a pawn to be sacrificed in their deadly game of chess. If only they knew the truth. The apartment itself was a testament to wartime survival. Sparse furniture that could be abandoned at a moment's notice, blackout curtains that hadn't been opened in months, and a go bag always packed and ready by the door. Elena had learned early in the conflict that in Sarajevo, the difference between life and death often came down to how quickly you could disappear. She pulled on her UN translator's jacket, the blue fabric worn thin from constant use. The irony wasn't lost on her. She spent her days translating conversations between peacekeepers who couldn't keep the peace and politicians who had no intention of making it. But the job provided cover, access, and, most importantly, information that she passed along through carefully constructed dead drops to her father's network. Colonel Viktor Petrov wasn't just coordinating arms shipments, as Serbian intelligence believed. He was running one of the most sophisticated counterintelligence operations of the entire Bosnian conflict. Elena wasn't just his daughter, she was his most valuable asset, trained from childhood in the arts of deception, surveillance, and, when necessary, elimination. The tattoo hidden beneath her clothing wasn't a youthful indiscretion or artistic expression. It was a map etched in specially formulated ink that was invisible except under specific lighting conditions. The intricate design revealed the locations of Serbian ammunition depots, safe houses, and command posts throughout Bosnia and Herzegovina. Information that her father's network had spent 2 years gathering, often at the cost of good people's lives. Elena checked her watch, 17:45. In 15 minutes, she would leave for her Tuesday evening ritual at Café Europa, unaware that 5 men were already positioning themselves along her route. She had no idea that Dragovic's team had been watching her for weeks, cataloging her movements, learning her patterns. The counter-surveillance training her father had drilled into her had made her cautious, but even the most careful operative could fall victim to patient observation. 3 blocks away, in the ruins of what had once been a music school, Zoran Milic forced his eye to the scope of his rifle and watched Elena's apartment building. His job was simple. If the operation went sideways, if Elena tried to run, or if UN peacekeepers appeared, he was to create a distraction. The boy's hands were steadier when he was behind a rifle. The weapon gave him purpose, made the trembling stop. "Target is moving," he whispered into his radio, watching Elena emerge from the building and begin her walk toward the old quarter. She moved with the careful awareness of someone who understood that death could come from any direction, her green eyes constantly scanning the shadows between buildings. Dragovic received the transmission as he sat in the driver's seat of their stolen van, parked in an alley that intersected Elena's route. His fingers drummed nervously against the steering wheel as he watched pedestrians hurry past, heads down, trying to become invisible. Everyone in Sarajevo had learned that invisibility was a survival skill. "Remember," he said into his radio, addressing his entire team, "we need her alive and unmarked. The colonel won't negotiate for damaged goods." What Dragovich didn't know was that Colonel Petrov had been expecting this moment for months. His network had identified the Serbian unit through a combination of signal intelligence and human sources. They knew about Dragovich's warehouse meetings, about their surveillance of Elena, about their plan to use her as leverage. The colonel had spent weeks debating whether to extract his daughter from Sarajevo or use her as bait in a larger trap. In the end, Elena had made the choice herself. "Let them come," she had told her father during their last clandestine meeting in the basement of a bombed-out church. "When they see what I'm carrying, they'll realize they've made a mistake. Sometimes the best way to protect an asset is to let the enemy think they've captured it." As Elena walked through the narrow streets of old Sarajevo, she was acutely aware that she was being watched. Her training had taught her to recognize the subtle signs: the man reading a newspaper who never turned a page, the woman window shopping who showed no interest in the merchandise, the street vendor who paid more attention to pedestrians than to potential customers. She could have varied her route, could have returned to her apartment or sought refuge in the UN compound. Instead, she maintained her pace, following the path that would lead her directly into Dragovich's trap. Because Elena Petrov understood something that her would-be captors did not. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you could do to your enemy was to give them exactly what they thought they wanted. The cafe was just 2 blocks away when she noticed the van. It was positioned perfectly to intercept her route, its engine running despite the fact that the driver appeared to be reading a magazine. Amateur hour, she thought, but amateurs were often the most unpredictable. She touched her small of her back, feeling the assuring weight of the ceramic knife hidden beneath her jacket. Her father had taught her that sometimes the best weapon was the one your enemy would never think to look for. "I'm approaching the intercept point," she whispered into the microphone hidden in her collar. Somewhere in the city, her father's team was listening, ready to spring their own trap if her gambit failed. Elena Petrov took a deep breath and walked directly toward her destiny. The abduction happened exactly as Dragovich had planned it. As Elena rounded the corner into the narrow alley, Nicholas Stoyanovich stumbled out of a doorway, feigning drunkenness. The collision looked accidental to any casual observer, just another casualty of wartime desperation seeking solace in alcohol. But as Elena reached out to steady the drunk man, 2 other figures emerged from the shadows. Dr. Stefan Radek moved with the practiced efficiency of a man who had performed this operation many times before. The syringe in his hand contained just enough sedative to keep Elena compliant, without rendering her completely unconscious. They needed her awake enough to walk to the van without drawing attention, but docile enough not to resist. Elena felt the sharp prick of the needle beneath her jacket and knew immediately what was happening. She had perhaps 30 seconds before the drug took full effect. Instead of fighting, she allowed herself to stumble, playing into their expectations of how a frightened civilian would react. Her apparent compliance made Dragovich's men careless, exactly what she had been counting on. "Easy," Dr. Radek murmured in her ear as he guided her toward the waiting van. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." As they bundled her into the vehicle's cargo area, Elena managed to activate the emergency beacon sewn into the lining of her jacket. The signal would alert her father's team to her location, but more importantly, it would begin recording everything that happened next. Sometimes intelligence was more valuable than immediate rescue. The warehouse smelled of motor oil and decay when they arrived 40 minutes later. Elena's vision was still cloudy from the sedative, but her mind was sharp enough to catalog everything she observed: the number of men, their weapons, the layout of the building, potential escape routes. Her training had taught her that information gathering never stopped, regardless of circumstances. They secured her to a metal chair in the center of the warehouse, using plastic zip ties that bit into her wrists. Dragovich positioned himself directly in front of her, while his men formed a loose circle around them. The interrogation setup was designed to maximize psychological pressure. 5 against 1, no escape, nowhere to hide. "Miss Petrov," Dragovich began, his voice carrying the tone of a man who believed he held all the advantages. "I apologize for the dramatic introduction, but your father has made himself very difficult to reach through conventional means." Elena raised her head to meet his gaze, and for a moment Dragovich was struck by the complete absence of fear in her green eyes. Most kidnapping victims, even trained soldiers, showed some sign of panic or desperation by this point. Elena looked at him with the kind of clinical interest a scientist might show when examining a particularly interesting specimen. "You've made a mistake," she said simply. Nikola Stoyanovich laughed, the sound harsh in the enclosed space. "The mistake was your father's, girl. He should have stayed hidden instead of playing soldier." "No," Elena replied, her voice steady despite the lingering effects of the sedative. "Your mistake was thinking I'm just the colonel's daughter." Something in her tone made Dr. Radek step closer, his medical training alerting him to subtle signs that his colleagues might miss. Elena's pulse was too steady, her breathing too controlled. These weren't the physiological responses of a terrified civilian. "Strip her," Dragovich ordered suddenly. The command came partly from tactical necessity. They needed to check for hidden weapons or communication devices, but also from a darker impulse to humiliate and break down their prisoners' psychological defenses. Elena didn't resist as they cut away her jacket and shirt, revealing the lean, muscled physique of someone who had spent years in physical training. Scars crisscrossed her torso, the mark of knife training, bullet wounds that had healed with professional medical care, burn marks that spoke of interrogation resistance conditioning. But it was Alexander Yovich, the silent sniper, who saw it first. As they turned Elena to check her back for additional weapons, the light from the overhead bulb illuminated the tattoo below her left shoulder blade. What had appeared to be an abstract design in normal lighting revealed itself under the warehouse's fluorescent glare as something entirely different. Alexander's sharp intake of breath caused the others to look more closely. The tattoo was intricate beyond anything they had expected, a perfect reproduction of the Serbian army's classified operations map for the entire Balkan region. But that wasn't what made the battle-hardened sniper take an involuntary step backward. Incorporated into the design so subtly that it took trained eyes to recognize it was the symbol of the Black Hand, the secret military society that had assassinated Archduke Franz Ferdinand and triggered World War I. But this version was different, updated with modern elements that suggested a contemporary resurrection of the organization. More shocking still were the names woven into the artistic flourishes of the tattoo. Names of Serbian commanders, politicians, and intelligence officers. Names of people who were supposed to be on their side. Names that were accompanied by what appeared to be targeting information, locations, schedules, vulnerabilities. Dr. Radek felt his medical training kick in as he automatically began cataloging what he was seeing. The tattoo wasn't just artwork, it was an intelligence database inscribed in human flesh. The implications were staggering. If Elena Petrov was carrying this information on her body, it meant she wasn't just a translator for the UN. She wasn't even just an intelligence operative for her father's network. "Mother of God," Zorn whispered, his young voice cracking with the weight of realization. "She's not the colonel's daughter. She's—" "Black Hand," Nikola finished, his massive frame suddenly seeming smaller in the presence of something he had thought was legend. "The colonel's daughter is fucking Black Hand." The warehouse fell silent except for the sound of rain against the windows and 5 men trying to process the fact that they had just kidnapped one of the most dangerous operatives in the Balkans.
The silence in the warehouse stretched like a taut wire, each man processing the implications of what they had discovered. The Black Hand wasn't just a historical footnote from World War I. Intelligence reports had suggested the organization had been reconstituted during the Yugoslav wars, operating in the shadows to destabilize governments and eliminate threats to Serbian interests. But those reports had been dismissed as propaganda, ghost stories told to frighten enemy combatants. Elena remained motionless in the chair, but her demeanor had subtly shifted. The vulnerability that had seemed so convincing moments earlier was gone, replaced by something that made the temperature in the room seem to drop several degrees. When she spoke, her voice carried an authority that none of them had expected from their captive. "You have approximately 6 minutes," she said, checking the dive watch on her wrist with casual precision. "That's how long it takes for a Black Hand response team to triangulate an emergency beacon and reach this location." Dragovich felt his mouth go dry. "You're bluffing." Elena smiled, and the expression contained no warmth whatsoever. "Alexander Yovich," Born March 15, 1968 in Novi Sad. Your mother's name was Maria. Your father died in a factory accident when you were 12. You have a birthmark shaped like a crescent moon on your left hip, and you've been having nightmares about a little girl in a blue dress ever since Srebrenica. The sniper's face went white. The information Alana had just recited wasn't in any military file. It was personal, intimate, the kind of details that could only be gathered through months of surveillance or interrogation of people close to him. Nikola Stoyanovich, Alana continued, her gaze shifting to the massive soldier, your wife left you in 1993, took your daughter to live with her sister in Munich. You've been sending them money every month, but the letters you write never get mailed because you don't think you deserve forgiveness for what you've done. Nikola's hands clenched into fists, but he made no move toward her. Elena's casual revelation of secrets he'd never shared with another living soul was more unsettling than any physical threat. Dr. Stefan Radic, you performed surgery on a wounded Bosnian child last winter, against orders. You told your commanders the boy died on the operating table, but you actually saved his life and arranged for him to be smuggled to safety. The guilt you carry isn't about the atrocities you committed, it's about the good deed you can't tell anyone about. The doctor's face had gone ashen. He glanced around at his comrades, wondering if Aleda's revelations would make them question his loyalty, his commitment to their cause. Young Zoran, Elena's voice softened slightly as she addressed the teenager. You didn't join this unit to avenge your brother. You joined because you're afraid of being alone with the memories of what you watched them do to him. The nightmares aren't about his death. They're about the fact that you were hidden in the basement and did nothing to help him. Tears started rolling down Zoran's cheeks. The weight of his shame, carried in silence for so long, suddenly felt unbearable when spoken out loud by this strange woman who seemed to see directly into his soul. Finally, Alana turned her attention to Dragovic. Milos Dragovic, you've been hunting my father for 8 months, but not because of his arms dealing. You blame him for the death of your unit at Tuzla. 67 men under your command, killed in what you believe was an ambush made possible by intelligence Viktor Petrov provided to enemy forces. Dragovic's entire body went rigid. He sold us out. Good men died because of him. No, Elena replied simply. Good men died because you were fed false intelligence by your own command structure. My father had nothing to do with Tuzla. You were sacrificed by people who found your unit expendable. The revelation hit Dragovic like a physical blow. For months, his hatred for Colonel Petrov had been the driving force keeping him functional, giving him purpose in a war that had stripped meaning from everything else. If Elena was telling the truth, if his quest for vengeance was built on a lie, then everything he had done since Tuzla was meaningless. 4 minutes, Elena said, glancing again at her watch. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Dr. Radic was the first to break from his paralysis. How do you know these things? How is any of this possible? The Black Hand has been watching all of you since the beginning. We don't just gather intelligence on our enemies, we study our own people. Catalog their weaknesses, their fears, their motivations. Knowledge is power, and power is the only thing that matters in war. She shifted in the chair, testing the restraints. The zip ties were tight, but not tight enough to cut off circulation entirely. The tattoo you're staring at isn't just a map, it's a database. Names, locations, tactical information, but also psychological profiles of every significant player in this conflict, including all of you. Alexander found his voice at last. What do you want? I want you to understand that you're not soldiers anymore. You're not even mercenaries. You're damaged men who've been manipulated into serving interests that have nothing to do with Serbia, nothing to do with justice or revenge. You're tools being used by people who consider you entirely disposable. The sound of vehicles approaching cut through the rain outside. Heavy engines, multiple units, moving with the coordinated precision of a military convoy. Elena's expression didn't change, but a subtle satisfaction flickered in her green eyes. 3 minutes early, she observed. Someone must have been eager to meet you. Dragovich rushed to the window, peering through the grimy glass at the convoy of black SUVs surrounding the warehouse. Armed figures were deploying from the vehicles with military precision, taking up positions that would make escape impossible. "We could kill you," Nicola said, though his voice lacked conviction. "You could try," Elena agreed, "but that would only guarantee that none of you leave here alive. The Black Hand doesn't negotiate with people who harm its operatives. However, they might be willing to make an arrangement with people who prove useful." The warehouse doors exploded inward with a controlled demolition charge, and smoke began filling the space. Through the haze, red laser dots danced across the walls as sniper teams acquired their targets. Elena remained perfectly calm as chaos erupted around her. "Your choice, gentlemen," she called out over the sound of boots hitting concrete and tactical teams shouting commands. "Die here as pawns, or live to discover who's really been pulling your strings."
The tactical teams that flooded into the warehouse moved with a precision that immediately distinguished them from the various militias and paramilitary groups that had proliferated during the Bosnian conflict. These weren't desperate men fighting for territory or ideology. They were professionals, equipped with state-of-the-art weapons and coordinated through sophisticated communication systems. Dragovich raised his hand slowly, his AK-47 forgotten on the floor beside him. The red laser dots painted across his chest made it clear that resistance would be suicide. Around him, his men made similar calculations, their weapons clattering to the concrete as they surrendered to superior force. "Stand down," came a voice from the smoke-filled doorway. The figure who emerged was tall, lean, wearing tactical gear that bore no national insignia or unit markings. His face was hidden behind night vision goggles, but his voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. "Commander Rakic," Elena said, a note of satisfaction in her voice. "Right on time." The tactical team leader approached Elena's chair, producing a knife to cut through her restraints. As the zip ties fell away, she rubbed her wrists to restore circulation, never taking her eyes off Dragovich and his men. "Status report," Rakic said, his voice professionally neutral. "Mission accomplished," Elena replied, standing and accepting the jacket one of the tactical operatives offered her. "All targets have been exposed to the intelligence we wanted them to see. Psychological profiles confirmed accurate. They're ready for the next phase." Dragovich felt the world tilting beneath his feet. "What are you talking about?" Elena turned to face him, and for the first time he saw something that might have been pity in her expression. "Did you really think this was a coincidence? 5 men, each carrying exactly the psychological damage we needed, each with exactly the skills required for what comes next, all coming together in the same unit." She gestured to Commander Rakic, who had removed his night vision goggles to reveal a face that was remarkably similar to Elena's own features. "Allow me to introduce my brother, Stefan Petrov. Yes, our father is Colonel Viktor Petrov. No, he's not coordinating arms shipments for the Bosnian government. He's running the most sophisticated intelligence operation in the Balkans. And you 5 have been under observation since the moment you survived Tuzla." Dr. Rajic's medical training helped him process information faster than his comrades. "You're saying we were specifically recruited? That everything that's happened to us has been carefully orchestrated," Elena confirmed. "The intelligence that led you to believe my father was responsible for Tuzla was planted by our operatives. Your unit's survival was ensured by our interference. Your recruitment into Dragovich Group was facilitated by our contacts. Even your surveillance of me was allowed to continue because we needed you to feel confident, to believe you were in control." Young Zoran's voice was barely a whisper. "Why?" Elena walked over to where her original clothes had been discarded, beginning to dress with casual indifference to her audience. "Because the Black Hand needs operatives who understand loss, who've been broken down and rebuilt by trauma. Men who have nothing left to lose make the most effective instruments." She pulled on her shirt, the tattoo disappearing beneath the fabric. "The information you saw isn't real intelligence. It's carefully constructed disinformation designed to test your reactions to confirm that you are suitable for recruitment. The real question is whether you're smart enough to understand the opportunity being offered to you." Alexander, who had remained silent throughout most of the encounter, finally spoke. "What kind of opportunity?" Commander Rakic stepped forward, producing a tablet computer from his tactical vest. The screen displayed a series of photographs. Politicians, military officers, business leaders from across the former Yugoslavia. The war is ending, but the people who profited from it have no intention of letting peace take hold permanently. They're already positioning themselves for the next conflict, the next opportunity to accumulate power and wealth through violence. He swiped through the images, each face accompanied by detailed intelligence profiles. These are the real enemies, not Bosnian Muslims or Croatian Catholics or Serbian Orthodox believers. The profiteers, the arms dealers who sold weapons to all sides, the politicians who fanned ethnic hatred to distract from their corruption, the commanders who sacrificed good soldiers to protect their own interests. Elena had finished dressing and now stood beside her brother. The Black Hand was reconstituted not to serve Serbian nationalism, but to eliminate the cancer that's been feeding on the corpse of Yugoslavia. We offer you a chance to direct your skills against targets that actually deserve what you're capable of delivering. Dragovic looked around at his men, seeing his own confusion reflected in their faces. Everything they had believed about their situation, their purpose, their identity, had been stripped away in the span of minutes. And if we refuse, then you walk away, Elena said simply. Return to your lives, try to find meaning in a world that has no use for your particular talents. Pretend that the things you've seen and done can be forgotten. Watch as the same people who destroyed Yugoslavia move on to destabilize other regions, create other conflicts, sacrifice other soldiers. She moved closer to Dragovic, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Or you can accept that your survival at Tuzla, your expertise in warfare, your understanding of loss, all of it can serve a purpose greater than revenge or nationalism or the petty territorial squabbles that have consumed this region. The warehouse fell silent except for the sound of rain against the windows and the distant rumble of thunder. 5 men stood at a crossroads, being offered a chance to transform their trauma into purpose, their skills into instruments of a justice that transcended the ethnic divisions that had defined the conflict. "How long do we have to decide?" Nicola asked. Elena smiled, and this time there was genuine warmth in the expression. "You have until dawn. That's when the first mission begins. With or without you." Dawn was still 3 hours away when Dragovic made his decision. He had spent the interim in a small room adjacent to the warehouse, staring at a dossier that contained more truth about the Bosnian conflict than he had encountered in 3 years of fighting. The photographs and documents Elena's team had provided painted a picture of systematic manipulation that made his personal quest for vengeance seem pathetically naive. The arms dealer who had supplied weapons to his unit at Tuzla, the same dealer who had sold identical weapons to the Bosnian forces that had ambushed them, the intelligence officer who had provided the false information that led to the massacre, a man who had been taking payments from multiple sides throughout the conflict, the politician who had delivered stirring speeches about Serbian honor while secretly negotiating to sell Serbian territory to the highest bidder. Each revelation stripped away another layer of the beliefs that had sustained him through the darkest period of his life. But rather than leaving him feeling empty, the truth offered something he hadn't experienced since watching his men die in that muddy field outside Tuzla: clarity. When he emerged from the room, he found his 4 comrades engaged in similar wrestling matches with their own consciences. Dr. Radic was studying medical records that showed how wartime casualties had been systematically inflated to justify increased international aid that had been diverted to private accounts rather than reaching actual victims. Alexander was examining ballistics reports that proved Serbian snipers had been deliberately targeting Serbian civilians to create martyrs for propaganda purposes. Young Zoran sat with his head in his hands, overwhelmed by intelligence files that revealed his brother hadn't been executed for resisting occupation. He had been killed for refusing to participate in a staged massacre designed to justify ethnic cleansing operations. Nicola was perhaps taking it hardest of all. The massive soldier had discovered that the unit responsible for driving his family from their home hadn't been Bosnian forces. They had been Serbian paramilitaries disguised as enemy combatants, creating refugees to justify military operations in the region. "Gentlemen, Elena said as she entered the room, now dressed in black tactical gear that matched her brother's unit. I trust your reading has been illuminating. Illuminating, Dragovich repeated, tasting the word like something bitter. That's one way to put it. I prefer soul-crushing. Elena nodded sympathetically. The truth usually is, initially. But consider the alternative, spending the rest of your lives fighting shadows while the real enemies count their profits and plan their next war. She activated a wall-mounted display screen, showing a map of the Balkans marked with dozens of red indicators. These represent active Black Hand operations currently underway across the region. Some are intelligence-gathering missions, others are direct action operations against high-value targets who have been identified as primary drivers of continued instability. The red dots clustered around major cities, Belgrade, Zagreb, Sarajevo, and Skopje, but also appeared in smaller locations that most people had never heard of. Each dot represented someone who had profited from the bloodshed, someone who was working to ensure that peace remained fragile and temporary. The mission I'm offering you, Elena said, takes place in Pale, just outside Sarajevo. 3 men who have been instrumental in financing paramilitary operations throughout the conflict are meeting to discuss their post-war business opportunities. They believe the Dayton Accords will create new opportunities for arms trafficking, human trafficking, and economic exploitation. She clicked a remote control, and the screen displayed photographs of 3 middle-aged men in expensive suits. None of them looked like soldiers. They had the soft appearance of people who had grown wealthy, while others did the fighting and dying. Victor Kramer, Elena said, indicating the first photograph, Austrian arms dealer who has supplied weapons to all sides while maintaining diplomatic immunity through carefully placed bribes, estimated to have personally profited over 50 million Deutschmarks from Yugoslav wars. The second photograph showed a heavy-set man with the calculating eyes of someone accustomed to evaluating human life in purely financial terms. Dmitry Volkov, former KGB operative turned freelance intelligence broker, he's been selling classified information to the highest bidder, including troop movements that led to several massacres on all sides of the conflict. The final man appeared younger than his companions, with the kind of practiced smile that suggested a career in politics or public relations. And finally, Marco Benedetti, Italian businessman who has been coordinating human trafficking operations throughout the region. Children orphaned by the war, women displaced by ethnic cleansing, he's built an empire selling human misery to wealthy clients across Europe. Elena paused, allowing the information to sink in. These 3 men have a combined body count that exceeds most military units. They will be meeting at a private villa in Pale tomorrow night to celebrate their survival of the conflict and plan their expansion into other troubled regions. Rwanda is at the top of their list. Dragovich felt a familiar rage building in his chest, but this time it was focused, purposeful. These weren't abstract enemies or ethnic rivals. These were the parasites who had fed on the suffering of his people, all people, regardless of their background or beliefs. What's the mission profile? He asked, his voice steady and professional. Elena smiled, recognizing the shift in his tone. Elimination. All 3 targets, plus any security personnel who resist. The villa will be isolated, private security only, no civilian casualties anticipated. You would have complete tactical autonomy once the operation begins. She gestured to her brother, who stepped forward with a tablet displaying architectural plans of the target location. Commander Rakic will provide logistical support, but this would be your operation, your team, your plan, your execution. Dr. Radic looked up from the medical files he had been studying. And afterward, what happens to us? Elena replied, It depends on your performance and your inclination. The Black Hand can always use skilled operatives, but we're not a traditional military organization. We don't conscript soldiers or demand loyalty oaths. You would be free to walk away after any mission, with enough financial compensation to start new lives wherever you choose. Young Zoran raised his head for the first time in hours. Why should we trust you? How do we know this isn't just another manipulation? Elena considered the question seriously. You don't know, and you shouldn't trust us completely. Trust is earned through actions, not words. But consider this. We've already demonstrated our ability to manipulate you. If our intentions were malicious, why reveal our capabilities? Why offer you a choice at all? She moved to the window, looking out at the pre-dawn darkness that still shrouded Sarajevo. The truth is, we need you as much as you need us. The Black Hand requires operatives who understand the cost of war, who've seen what happens when good people do nothing to stop evil. Idealists and patriots are useful, but they lack the edge that comes from disillusionment. Alexander, who had remained characteristically silent throughout the briefing, finally spoke. When do we leave? Elena turned from the window and Dragovich could see the satisfaction in her expression. Transport departs in 15 minutes. Weapons and equipment will be provided en route. The villa is expecting a catering delivery at 2200 hours. That will be your insertion point. She paused, studying each of their faces. Once you accept this mission, there's no going back to who you were before. You'll have crossed a line that will fundamentally change how you see the world and your place in it. The Black Hand doesn't create soldiers. It creates something else entirely. Nicholas stood up, his massive frame casting shadows across the room. I'm in. One by one, the others voiced their agreement. Dr. Radek with clinical detachment, Alexander with quiet determination, young Zoran with the fervor of someone finally seeing a path towards justice rather than revenge. Finally, all eyes turned to Dragovich. As their leader, his decision would carry the most weight, would determine whether they remained a fractured group of broken soldiers or became something new, something purposeful. He thought about his men who had died at Tuzla, about the families destroyed by profiteers and arms dealers, about the children like the ones in the photographs on Elena's tablet who would grow up in a world shaped by the greed of men who had never held a weapon or buried a friend. We're in, he said, and felt something inside him shift irrevocably. All of us. Elena nodded, then activated her radio. Control, this is Raven. Package is confirmed. Prep teams for immediate deployment. The response came back immediately. Copy, Raven. Transport ETA 15 minutes. Welcome to the Black Hand.
The villa in Pale perched on a hillside overlooking the valley like a monument to wealth built on blood. Even in the darkness, Dragovich could see that no expense had been spared in its construction. Marble columns, manicured gardens, and security lighting that created pools of illumination around the perimeter. It was the kind of ostentatious display that only war profiteers could afford, while entire cities lay in ruins just kilometers away. Through his night vision scope, Alexander counted 12 security personnel positioned around the property. They moved with the casual confidence of mercenaries who expected no real threat. After all, who would be foolish enough to attack 3 of the most well-connected criminals in the Balkans? Private security only, he whispered into his radio. No military discipline. Weapons look expensive but poorly maintained. These aren't soldiers, they're expensive bodyguards. Dragovich nodded, adjusting his position in the tree line that provided concealment for their observation post. The catering van that would serve as their insertion vehicle was parked 200 meters away, loaded with legitimate food and wine that would pass inspection, along with carefully concealed weapons and equipment hidden in specially constructed compartments. Dr. Radek would drive the van, his medical background providing the perfect cover. He could discuss nutrition and food safety with the kind of technical expertise that would bore security guards into complacency. Nikola and Zoran would accompany him as assistants, their weapons concealed beneath white catering uniforms that would allow them to move freely throughout the villa once inside. Dragovich and Alexander would provide overwatch from their current position, ready to eliminate any security personnel who interfered with the operation or attempted to call for reinforcements. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Get close,
eliminate the targets, extract cleanly. Movement at the main entrance, Alexander reported, watching through his rifle scope as an expensive sedan pulled up to the villa's front door. First target arriving. Victor Kramer emerged from the vehicle like a man who owned the world. His tailored suit probably cost more than most Bosnian families earned in a year, and the gold watch on his wrist caught the security lights as he gestured dismissively to his driver. Two bodyguards flanked him as he walked toward the villa's entrance, their movements suggesting military training despite their civilian clothes. "Arrogant bastard," Dragovich muttered, watching the arms dealer stride up the marble steps as if he were attending a state dinner rather than a meeting to plan future atrocities. Doesn't even look around, completely confident in his security. 15 minutes later, a second vehicle arrived. An armored Mercedes that moved with the weight of serious protection. Dmitry Volkov's paranoia was evident in every precaution. Advanced security sweep, radio communication with an off-site command post, and personal bodyguards who moved with the lethal efficiency of former Special Forces operators. Target 2 is more careful, Alexander observed. His people know what they're doing, will need to account for professional opposition once the shooting starts. The third arrival was perhaps the most disturbing. Marco Benedetti's convoy included not just security vehicles, but a second sedan containing what appeared to be several young women. Even from their distance, Dragovich could see that the women moved with the mechanical compliance of people who had been thoroughly broken by systematic abuse. "Jesus," Zorn's voice crackled over the radio, young rage making his transmission shaky. "He brought victims to a business meeting." "Focus," Dragovich ordered, though he felt his own anger threatening to overwhelm his tactical discipline. "We stick to the plan. Justice now, emotion later." Dr. Radek's voice came through clearly as he began the final approach in the catering van. Approaching main gate, security is conducting standard inspection, beginning performance. Through his scope, Dragovich watched as the van stopped at the villa's entrance and Dr. Radek emerged to speak with the security guards. Even from a distance, his body language projected the perfect combination of professional competence and civilian nervousness that would allay suspicion. The inspection lasted 8 minutes, long enough to seem thorough, brief enough to avoid real scrutiny. The guards checked the food compartments, ran a metal detector wand over the obvious areas, and conducted a cursory examination of identification documents. They found exactly what they expected to find, an overpriced catering service delivering an overpriced meal to wealthy clients. "We're inside," Dr. Radek reported, as the van disappeared into the villa's service entrance, beginning deployment. The next phase required precise timing. Nikola and Zoran would position themselves to control the villa's main exits, while Dr. Radek would make his way to the meeting room under the pretext of discussing the evening's menu with the clients. Once all 3 targets were confirmed in the same location, Dragovich would give the signal to begin the elimination sequence. "Targets confirmed." Dr. Radek's voice was barely audible over the radio. All 3 in the main dining room, minimal security presence inside. They're celebrating, champagne, cigars, completely relaxed. Dragovich felt the familiar calm that came just before combat, the heightened awareness that made every detail sharp and clear. "All units, this is control. Green light in 30 seconds. He watched through his scope as the villa's exterior security continued their routine patrols, unaware that death was already moving through the building they were supposed to protect. The irony wasn't lost on him. These men were being paid to guard people who had built their fortunes on the corpses of soldiers just like them. "Control, this is Nikola. Kitchen staff neutralized, service exits secured, no alarms. Control, this is Zoran. Main entrance secured, communications equipment disabled. Ready to proceed." Alexander adjusted his rifle sight, acquiring targets on the 2 exterior guards who had the best fields of fire toward potential escape routes. Overwatch ready. 2 guards marked for elimination, others positioned for suppression. Dr. Radek's final transmission was almost conversational. "Gentlemen are just finishing their appetizers. Suggest we proceed with the main course." Dragovich took a deep breath, thinking about Tuzla, about his dead comrades, about the children in the trafficking photographs, about the families torn apart by men who saw human suffering as a business opportunity. "All units, execute."
The villa's dining room was a testament to stolen wealth. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over mahogany furniture that had probably been looted from museums during the conflict. Oil paintings, likely seized from private collections of murdered families, adorned walls paneled in wood that cost more than most people's homes. It was a perfect setting for men who had built their fortunes on the systematic destruction of civilization. Dr. Radek entered the room carrying a silver serving tray, his white catering uniform and deferential posture making him effectively invisible to the three men who continued their conversation without pause. They were discussing expansion opportunities in Africa with the casual indifference of businessmen planning a restaurant franchise rather than coordinating mass murder. The beauty of Rwanda, Victor Creamer was saying, swirling expensive cognac in a crystal sniffer, is that the infrastructure is already destroyed. We won't need to create chaos. We'll simply monetize the existing instability. Dmitry Volkov nodded approvingly, his thick Russian accent making every word sound like a threat. My contacts in Moscow have confirmed government interest in off-books operations. They want plausible deniability, but guaranteed results. Very lucrative arrangement. Marco Benedetti leaned back in his chair, the picture of satisfaction. The refugee populations will provide excellent recruitment opportunities. Children separated from families, women with no economic alternatives. The European market is very demanding right now. Dr. Radek set down the serving tray and produced what appeared to be an expensive bottle of wine. As he moved toward the table, he activated the small transmitter hidden in his sleeve. The signal would alert the rest of the team that targets were confirmed and engaged. "Excuse me, gentlemen," Dr. Radek said in accented English, playing the role of a nervous foreign caterer. "I have brought special vintage for your celebration, very rare, very expensive, from private collection." Kramer barely glanced at him. "Yes, fine, just leave it and go." Instead of complying, Dr. Radek moved closer to the table, beginning to uncork the bottle with practiced efficiency. "Perhaps you would like to taste first. Very special wine, aged in cellars beneath Sarajevo, has unique flavor from, how do you say, local conditions." Something in his tone made Volkov look up sharply. The Russian survival instincts, honed by decades in intelligence work, finally registered that something was wrong. The caterer's movements were too controlled, too purposeful. His hand showed calluses consistent with weapons training rather than kitchen work. "Who are you?" Volkov asked, his hand moving instinctively toward the pistol concealed beneath his jacket. Dr. Radek smiled, and for the first time since entering the room, his expression was completely genuine. "I am Dr. Stefan Radek, formerly of the Serbian Army Medical Corps. I've spent the last 3 years treating wounds created by the weapons you've sold, trying to save children destroyed by the networks you've built." Kramer was reaching for a panic button built into the table when Dr. Radek moved with surprising speed. The wine bottle became a weapon, smashing across the arms dealer's skull with enough force to drop him unconscious to the floor. Blood mixed with expensive wine as it spread across the antique Persian rug. Benedetti scrambled backward, knocking over his chair as he tried to reach the door. He had managed 3 steps when Nicola appeared in the doorway, his massive frame blocking any escape. The human trafficker's face went white as he recognized the expression of a man who had seen the consequences of his work firsthand. Volkov had managed to clear his weapon, but Dr. Radek was already moving. Years of combat medicine had taught him anatomy in ways that most people couldn't imagine. He knew exactly where to strike to disable without killing immediately. His scalpel, concealed in his sleeve throughout the evening, found the precise nerve cluster in Volkov's wrist that would cause his hand to go numb instantly. The Russian's pistol clattered to the floor as Dr. Radek caught him in a medical restraint hold that immobilized him without causing permanent damage. "Do not struggle," the doctor said conversationally. "I have kept much worse patients alive through much more serious trauma. I can make this last as long as necessary." Zoran entered through the kitchen doorway, his young face set in an expression of grim determination. In his hands was a tablet computer displaying photographs, crime scene images from mass graves, refugee camps, trafficking safe houses, the evidence of what these 3 men had accomplished during their profitable war. "My name is Zoran Milik," he said, his voice steady but the tremor in his hands. "You killed my brother. Not directly, you don't do your own killing. But the weapons, the intelligence, the networks that made his murder possible,
All of that traces back to this room. Benedetti began to cry, the kind of desperate tears that come when someone realizes that money and connections won't save them. "Please, I can pay. Whatever you want. I have accounts." "We know about your accounts," Nicola said quietly, producing a smartphone that showed bank transfer confirmations. "Every euro has been redirected to refugee assistance organizations. Consider it restitution." Outside, thunder rumbled across the hills around Pale, as if the sky itself was applauding the justice finally being delivered in the marble-columned villa. Kramer was beginning to regain consciousness, blood matting his expensive hair as he tried to focus on his surroundings. When his vision cleared enough to see Dr. Radek standing over him with a medical bag, understanding dawned in his eyes. "You're going to torture us," he said, the words coming out slurred from his concussion. Dr. Radek considered this accusation seriously. "No," he said finally. "Torture implies that information will be extracted in exchange for the cessation of pain. What's going to happen to you is simply justice, the same justice you've denied to thousands of victims." He opened his medical bag, revealing instruments that could heal or harm with equal precision. "I'm going to ensure that you understand, viscerally and completely, exactly what you've inflicted on others. It will be educational for all of us." The three war profiteers finally understood that their wealth, their connections, their carefully constructed network of protection, none of it would save them from the reckoning they had spent years avoiding. Outside, thunder rumbled across the hills around Pale, as if the sky itself was applauding the justice finally being delivered in the marble-columned villa.
What happened in the villa's dining room over the next 30 minutes would never appear in any official report. But the psychological impact on Dragovic and his team was profound. Dr. Radek's medical expertise allowed him to extract not just confessions, but detailed intelligence about networks that stretched across 3 continents. The 3 war profiteers, faced with systematic dismantling of their carefully constructed mythology of invincibility, provided information that would fuel Black Hand operations for years to come. Victor Kramer broke first, his arrogance crumbling as Dr. Radek demonstrated exactly how much pain the human nervous system could experience while remaining conscious. The arms dealer revealed bank account numbers, contact lists, and shipping manifests that detailed weapons transfers to 17 different conflict zones. His carefully maintained image as a legitimate businessman dissolved as he begged for mercy that would never come. Dmitry Volkov lasted longer. His KGB training provided some resistance to interrogation techniques, but Dr. Radek had studied Soviet methods extensively and knew how to circumvent psychological conditioning through precise application of medical knowledge. When the Russian finally broke, he provided the names and locations of intelligence assets throughout Eastern Europe, including several operating within NATO command structures. Marco Benedetti's collapse was perhaps the most satisfying for the team. The human trafficker's revelation of his client list, wealthy Europeans who purchase human beings for entertainment, filled Zoran with a cold rage that he channeled into perfect focus. Each name Benedetti provided would become a target for future operations. By the time the 3 men died, they had given up enough intelligence to dismantle trafficking networks from Italy to Turkey, arms-dealing operations from Austria to Albania, and corruption schemes that reached into the highest levels of multiple governments. Their deaths were almost anticlimactic compared to the wealth of information they had provided. "Extraction complete," Dr. Radek reported into his radio as he finished documenting the scene. The villa security cameras had been disabled, physical evidence sanitized, and the bodies positioned to suggest an internal dispute rather than external assassination. Package delivered, intelligence harvest complete. Dragovic's voice crackled back through the static. "Copy. Exfil route is clear. Time to go home." But as the team regrouped at their extraction point, each man understood that home was no longer a place they could return to. The psychological transformation that Elena had warned them about was complete. They were no longer Serbian soldiers, Bosnian survivors, or even revenge-seeking vigilantes. They had become something else entirely. The safe house where they debriefed was located in a renovated monastery outside Belgrade, its ancient stones now housing some of the most sophisticated intelligence equipment in the Balkans. Elena was waiting for them when they arrived at dawn, her expression showing both satisfaction with the mission's success and concern for the psychological state of her new operatives. "Sit," she commanded, gesturing to chairs arranged around a circular table. "Tell me how you feel." The question caught them off guard. Military debriefings focused on tactical performance, intelligence gathered, objectives achieved. Personal feelings were considered irrelevant distractions from operational analysis. Zoran answered first, his young voice carrying a maturity that hadn't been there 24 hours earlier. "I'm empty," he said simply. "I thought killing the people responsible for my brother's death would fill something inside me. Instead, it just ended something." Nikola nodded slowly. "The anger is gone. For 3 years, rage has been the only thing keeping me functional. Now I don't know what replaces it." Dr. Roddick was examining his hands as if seeing them for the first time. "I used these to save lives for 15 years, then to take lives for 3 years, then last night to extract truth from lies. I'm not sure which version of myself is real anymore." Alexander, ever the sniper, was more analytical. The targets were eliminated with precision and efficiency. Intelligence was gathered without compromise. Mission objectives were achieved. Personal satisfaction is irrelevant to operational success. But even as he spoke, his tone suggested that the professional detachment he relied on was becoming harder to maintain. Elena listened without interruption, then activated a recording device on the table. "What you're experiencing is called moral injury recovery. When someone spends years believing that violence serves a righteous purpose, then discovers that the purpose was fabricated, the psychological adjustment can be traumatic." She stood and walked to a window overlooking the monastery's courtyard. "The Black Hand doesn't recruit soldiers. We rehabilitate them. We provide purpose to people who have discovered that their previous purpose was built on lies. But that transition requires acknowledging that everything you believed about yourselves, about your war, about your enemies, was carefully constructed fiction." Dragovich finally spoke, his voice carrying the weight of command decisions that had shaped other men's lives. "So what happens now? Do we become full-time assassins? International terrorists? Mercenaries for hire?" Elena turned from the window, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "You become whatever you choose to become. The Black Hand provides opportunities, resources, and targets. But we don't own our operatives. We partner with them." She returned to the table and produced a tablet displaying a world map marked with dozens of red indicators. These represent ongoing operations in 23 countries, arms trafficking networks in Southeast Asia, human trafficking routes through Mexico, war profiteering schemes in sub-Saharan Africa. The cancer that consumed Yugoslavia has metastasized globally. The map zoomed in to show specific locations, dates, target profiles. Each marker represented people who were profiting from human misery on an industrial scale, protected by wealth and political connections that made them untouchable through legal means. Some of our operatives work full-time. Others return to civilian lives and accept missions as their circumstances allow. Some focus on intelligence gathering, others on direct action. The choice is entirely yours." She paused, studying each man's face carefully. "But understand that once you've seen this, once you know the scope of what we're fighting, walking away becomes very difficult. The knowledge that you could have prevented suffering and chose not to act is its own form of torture. Dragovic looked around the table at his men, no, his partners now, and saw his own understanding reflected in their expressions. They had thought they were choosing between revenge and justice, between nationalism and pragmatism. Instead, they had chosen between ignorance and responsibility. The decision, when it came, was unanimous.
6 months later, Dragovic stood on the observation deck of a luxury hotel in Monaco, watching the Mediterranean sun set over a harbor filled with yachts worth more than most countries' annual budgets. Below him, the most exclusive casino in Europe was preparing for an evening that would attract the wealthy elite from across the continent. To any observer, he looked like just another successful businessman enjoying the view while waiting for his dinner reservation. The transformation had been remarkable. Gone were the rough military fatigues and unkempt appearance of a war-weary soldier. In their place was a perfectly tailored Italian suit, expensive watch, and the kind of subtle confidence that came with access to unlimited resources. The Black Hand had provided new identities, education and high society customs, and financial backing that made their operatives indistinguishable from the targets they hunted. His earpiece crackled with Dr. Radek's voice, transmitted from his position in the casino's medical facility. Target confirmed at Table 7, playing Baccarat. 2 personal bodyguards positioned for optimal field coverage, electronic countermeasures active around his position. The target was Alexander Kozlov, a Russian oligarch who had made his fortune selling military equipment to both sides during the Yugoslav wars before expanding his operations to Africa and Asia. Intelligence gathered from their previous operations had revealed that Kozlov was planning to fund a new conflict in Somalia, where drought conditions had created the perfect environment for arms sales and resource exploitation. Overwatch in position, Alexander reported from his sniper's nest on a yacht anchored 200 meters offshore. His rifle was concealed within what appeared to be a sophisticated telescope for astronomical observation, a hobby that provided perfect cover for extended surveillance of coastal targets. Nikola's voice came through clearly from the casino floor. Perimeter security mapped, escape routes confirmed, local police response time estimated at 8 minutes, private security response immediate but manageable. Young Zoran had perhaps adapted most remarkably to their new circumstances. His facility with languages and natural charm had made the team's primary social infiltration specialist. Tonight, he was posing as the nephew of a Belgian industrialist, using his youthful appearance to gain access to social circles that would be suspicious of older operatives. Target is intoxicated, Zoran reported from his position at the bar near Kozlov's table, celebrating what he calls the African opportunity. His companions include the Italian defense minister and someone he introduced as his Swiss banker. Elena's voice cut through the communications chatter with the authority of mission control. All units, be advised that intelligence has identified 3 additional high-value targets in the casino tonight. This is now a target-rich environment with expanded objectives. The mission had evolved from a simple elimination to something more complex. Kozlov's presence had attracted other war profiteers who saw the Monaco casino as neutral territory where business could be conducted without surveillance. The Black Hand's intelligence network had identified a war crimes tribunal judge who had been taking bribes to reduce sentences, a UN peacekeeping commander who had been selling weapons meant for refugee protection, and a Swiss banker who specialized in laundering money from conflict zones. New mission parameters, Elena continued. Eliminate primary target as planned, but gather intelligence on secondary targets for future operations. This is an unprecedented opportunity to map the entire Mediterranean network. Dragovic felt the familiar calm that preceded complex operations. 6 months of training had transformed his team from reactive soldiers into proactive hunters. They no longer waited for targets to reveal themselves. They created opportunities to engage enemies on terms of their own choosing. Beginning approach, Dragovic announced, adjusting his tie as he prepared to enter the casino. His cover identity as a Croatian shipping magnate had been carefully constructed over months, complete with legitimate business transactions and social connections that would withstand scrutiny. The casino floor was a symphony of controlled chaos. The soft clicking of chips, the whispered conversations of people making deals worth millions, the underlying tension of high-stakes gambling where fortunes could be won or lost with a single card. Dragovic moved through the crowd with practiced ease, his appearance and demeanor allowing him to blend seamlessly among the wealthy elite.
Kozlov was exactly where intelligence had placed him, surrounded by the trappings of success and the protection of men who had never failed to keep their clients alive. The oligarch was winning at baccarat, his laughter echoing across the gaming table as he celebrated each victory with expensive champagne. Target acquired, Dragovich murmured into his collar microphone. Beginning social approach. He positioned himself at an adjacent gaming table, close enough to overhear conversations but distant enough to avoid immediate scrutiny. Kozlov was indeed discussing African operations, but the scope was larger than intelligence had suggested. The oligarch wasn't just planning to arm existing conflicts, he was coordinating the creation of new ones. The beauty of resource wars, Kozlov was explaining to his companions, is that they're self-sustaining. Provide weapons to rebels, they capture mining territory, use mineral wealth to buy more weapons, we profit from both ends of the cycle. Dr. Radek's voice crackled through the earpiece. Medical emergency being staged in 30 seconds. Casino security will be distracted. Emergency exits will be monitored by our people. Execute on my mark. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. A staged medical emergency would draw security attention while providing cover for Dragovich's approach to Kozlov's table. In the confusion, a simple injection would deliver a compound that would simulate a heart attack, fatal but appearing completely natural to medical examination. Mark, Dr. Radek announced. Dragovich rose from his table and began moving towards his target, knowing that in 60 seconds, another war profiteer would be eliminated, and the intelligence gathered would save thousands of lives across multiple continents. The game of justice had begun.
The medical emergency erupted with perfect timing. Dr. Radek had positioned a Black Hand operative at a slot machine near the casino's main entrance, and the man's sudden collapse sent casino security rushing toward what appeared to be a heart attack in progress. The distraction lasted exactly 90 seconds, long enough for Dragovich to approach Kozlov's table and position himself within striking distance of the oligarch. "Excuse me," Dragovich said in accented English, addressing Kozlov directly. "I believe we have mutual friend in Zagreb shipping business. Perhaps you remember Tomislav Horvat." The name was carefully chosen, a real person who had died in a car accident 6 months earlier, but whose business connections would be familiar to anyone operating in Yugoslav arms trafficking networks. Kozlov's eyes lit up with recognition and greed. Dead men's business contacts often meant unclaimed assets and exploitable opportunities. Of course, Kozlov exclaimed, gesturing for Dragovich to join their table. "Tomislav, yes, terrible what happened to him. Are you taking over operations?" Dragovich allowed himself to be drawn into conversation while his right hand moved with surgical precision. The injection device concealed in his cufflink delivered its contents through Kozlov's expensive jacket without the oligarch feeling anything more than what might have been a mosquito bite. The compound, a Black Hand development based on Dr. Radek's medical expertise, would take 12 minutes to reach full effect, allowing enough time for natural conversation before symptoms appeared. Tomislav's operations were quite impressive. I understand you had similar arrangement for African markets. Kozlov leaned closer, lowering his voice conspiratorially. Africa is the future, my friend. Natural resources, political instability, minimal international oversight. We are planning expansion into Democratic Republic of Congo next month. Perhaps we can discuss partnership. As the oligarch began outlining his plans for fueling civil war in Central Africa, Dragovich caught fragments of intelligence that would prove invaluable for future Black Hand operations. Weapon shipment schedules, financial transfer protocols, the names of government officials who had been bribed to facilitate arms trafficking, all of it flowing freely from a man who believed he was recruiting a new business partner. "Target elimination in progress," Dragovich reported quietly into his collar microphone. "Intelligence harvest exceeding expectations." Elena's voice came back immediately. "Copy. Exfiltration route remains clear. Continue intelligence gathering until target shows symptoms." The casino around them continued its glittering dance of wealth and excess, completely unaware that justice was being administered at Table 7.
Kozlov's companions, the Italian defense minister and Swiss banker, were providing additional intelligence simply through casual conversation, revealing networks of corruption that stretched from Rome to Zurich to several African capitals. 8 minutes into the injection timeline, Zoran appeared at their table carrying a champagne bottle and wearing the uniform of casino service staff. His youthful appearance and practiced charm made him nearly invisible to the wealthy patrons who never really saw service workers as human beings. "Compliments of casino management," Zoran said in perfect French, pouring champagne for each man at the table. As he served Kozlov, he discreetly activated a recording device that would capture the next few minutes of conversation for intelligence analysis. "You are too kind," Kozlov said, accepting the champagne without really looking at the young man serving it. To the oligarch, Zoran was simply another faceless worker in a world built for his convenience. He had no idea he was being served by someone whose brother had been killed with weapons Kozlov had personally supplied to Serbian paramilitaries. 10 minutes after injection, Kozlov began showing the first subtle symptoms. His color started to change almost imperceptibly, and his breathing became slightly labored. To any observer, it would appear that the oligarch was simply feeling the effects of alcohol and excitement from his gambling victories. "Are you feeling well?" Dragovich asked with apparent concern. "Perhaps too much celebration tonight." He waved dismissively. "I am fine. Russian constitution, very strong. Now, about our business arrangement." 11 minutes. The oligarch's speech was becoming slightly slurred, but in a casino filled with intoxicated wealthy patrons, no one would notice until it was too late for medical intervention. Dr. Radek had calculated the dosage precisely, enough to ensure death, but delivered slowly enough to appear like natural cardiac failure rather than assassination. 12 minutes. Kozlov clutched his chest, his face going pale as the compound reached its full effectiveness. I think I need doctor," he gasped, looking around the table with sudden panic in his eyes. "Of course," Dragovich said, standing quickly and signaling for help. "Someone call medical assistance immediately." Dr. Radek appeared within seconds, having positioned himself near the casino's medical station. To any observer, his rapid response would seem like professional dedication rather than premeditated murder. "He's having a massive coronary," Dr. Radek announced loud enough for security personnel to hear. "Get the defibrillator from medical. Called for an ambulance immediately." The next few minutes were perfectly choreographed chaos. Casino security cordoned off the area while Dr. Radek performed what appeared to be heroic efforts to save Kozlov's life. In reality, every intervention was designed to ensure the opposite outcome while maintaining the appearance of professional medical care. Alexander Kozlov, arms dealer and war profiteer responsible for fueling conflicts across 3 continents, died on the marble floor of the Monte Carlo casino at 11:47 p.m. The official cause of death would be listed as sudden cardiac arrest brought on by alcohol consumption and gambling excitement. No autopsy would be performed. The compound Dr. Radek had developed broke down completely within hours, leaving no trace for forensic examination. "Target eliminated," Dragovich reported as he moved away from the scene, blending back into the crowd of concerned onlookers. Elena's voice came through his earpiece with quiet satisfaction. "Mission accomplished. Intelligence gathered will support operations for the next 6 months. Return to base for debrief." As the team regrouped at their extraction point, Dragovich reflected on how completely their lives had transformed. 6 months earlier, they had been broken soldiers, seeking revenge for imagined betrayals. Now they were instruments of justice operating on a global scale, their skills refined and their purpose clarified through direct action against enemies who had previously seemed untouchable. The safe house overlooking the Mediterranean was quiet except for the sound of waves against rocks below. Elena was waiting for them with files containing their next assignments.
operations that would take them to Bangkok, Lagos, and Mexico City in pursuit of targets who believed their wealth and connections made them immune to consequences. Kozlov's death will send ripples through the entire network, Elena explained, spreading intelligence reports across the table. His associates will be looking for new partners, which creates opportunities for infiltration. His financial networks will be disrupted, which forces other arms dealers into the open. One elimination often creates multiple new operational possibilities. Dr. Radic was examining the medical data they had gathered during the mission. The compound performed exactly as predicted. No trace antibodies, symptoms consistent with natural causes. Timeline allowed for complete intelligence extraction before termination. Zoran had developed remarkable analytical skills during his months with the Black Hand. The conversations I recorded reveal connections to trafficking networks in Eastern Europe. Cross-referencing with previous intelligence suggests coordinated operations involving Russian, Italian, and Albanian criminal organizations. Nicola was studying tactical reports from their other ongoing operations. Teams in Nigeria eliminated 2 arms dealers last week. Operations in Cambodia successfully disrupted a trafficking network. The Bangkok cell reports 3 high-value targets identified for next month. Alexander, as always, focused on the practical aspects. Weapons cache in Montenegro has been secured. Safe houses in Rome and Milan remain uncompromised. Communication networks are functioning normally across all operational areas. Elena nodded approvingly. You've all adapted remarkably well to this life. The question now is whether you're ready for the next level of responsibility. She activated a wall display showing a global map marked with hundreds of red indicators. What you've been doing is tactical, eliminating individual targets, disrupting specific networks. But the Black Hand's ultimate mission is strategic. We're not just hunting war profiteers, we're dismantling the entire system that makes their existence possible. The map zoomed in to show clusters of activity around major financial centers. Banks that launder conflict money, politicians who provide diplomatic cover, journalists who suppress inconvenient stories, business leaders who profit from instability,
Military contractors who supply both sides of every conflict, an entire ecosystem of enablers who make war profitable. Dragovich studied the display, understanding that what Elena was describing would require operations on a scale that dwarfed anything they had previously attempted. What are you proposing? I'm proposing that you stop being operators and become commanders, Elena replied. Each of you would lead your own cell, recruit your own operatives, plan your own missions. The Black Hand needs to expand beyond small tactical teams to something approaching an actual army. The implications were staggering. They would go from being soldiers following orders to generals commanding campaigns, from eliminating individual targets to coordinating operations that could reshape entire regions. The choice is yours, Elena continued. You can continue as you are, highly effective tactical operatives conducting precision missions, or you can accept responsibility for training the next generation of Black Hand commanders and expanding our capabilities exponentially. The decision, when it came, was inevitable. They had seen too much, understood too clearly the scope of the cancer they were fighting to settle for anything less than total commitment. One by one, they accepted their new roles as Black Hand commanders. The war against the war profiteers was about to escalate dramatically. 5 years later, the international arms trade had been reduced to a shadow of its former self. Trafficking networks that had operated for decades had vanished overnight. War profiteers who had once seemed untouchable were found dead in circumstances that authorities could never quite explain. The world became a marginally safer place, though the public would never know who to thank for it. The Black Hand remained a ghost story, a rumor whispered in intelligence circles, a cautionary tale told by criminals who sensed invisible predators stalking them through the shadows.
And in a monastery outside Belgrade, Elena Petrov, no longer the colonel's daughter, but the architect of a new kind of justice, continued planning operations that would make the world safe for children who would never know her name. The tattoo that had once marked her as a target now served as a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous thing you could show your enemy was exactly who you really were, because knowledge, properly applied, was the deadliest weapon of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.